Hello, this is Managerial Economics Deliverable number 2. My name is Sarah Atchison, and this presentation is for Rasmussen University. In deliverable number 2, we will be discussing an evaluation of the effects that the following scenarios have on the supply and demand of oil for oil company X. We will go over supply and demand of economic conditions in 4 different scenarios, and at the end we will discuss a recommendation and summary on whether or not the company should move forward with construction of the pipeline. Some common terms that you will need to be familiar with throughout this presentation and to follow along with the supply and demand curves will involve demand, which is simply the consumer's desire to purchase a good or service and how much of it they would want. Therefore, the law of demand is when consumers are demanding more of a good because of its lower price, it's holding other goods at a constant, or their tastes have changed and other factors have influenced their desire to purchase that good in the quantity at which they wish to consume. Determinants of demand are things that determine the effects and affect how much of the amount of demand of a certain good or service. Some of these determinants are taste, preference, number of items you're buying, price of substitute and complementary goods, income and expectations. Our next bullet is for supply, which is simply the amount of a certain good or service that is available. So the law of supply is the amount of good or service that a producer provides to the market. Determinants of supply are simply the things that determine the amount of supply needed. These determinants can include resource prices, process technology, taxes, subsidies, prices of substitutes and complementary goods, the number of sellers, and the expectations. Our final piece is the market, which is where we have buyers and sellers coming together to exchange said good or services. Equilibrium itself is the point where no participant wants to change his or her behavior. However, the equilibrium point on our graphs will be used throughout this presentation to show where the supply and the demand curves intersect. And our equilibrium price and quantity will be based on that intersection, and that will be how we find our price and quantity. In our first scenario, we are looking at restriction on drilling in the U.S. to protect preserved areas due to the regulations being passed. With limitations on drilling, there will be a decrease in the supply of oil, so the decrease in supply will cause our supply curve to shift to the left, which will represent an increase in our equilibrium price and a decrease in our equilibrium quantity. In scenario number 2, we look at the U.S. having a large increase in population and birth rates. If there are more people in the country, then the demand for oil will increase. This increase will cause the demand curve to shift to the right, so our equilibrium price and our equilibrium quantity will both increase. In scenario 3, we are looking at a recession. When a recession occurs, people aren't working, so the need for oil decreases as people do not have jobs to go to or money to spend, which will eliminate their sense of striving for extra activities. The demand for oil will decrease, which would also decrease the price. So the equilibrium price will be decreasing, the equilibrium quantity will be decreasing, and the demand curve itself will shift to the left. In our final scenario, scenario 4, there is an increase in the availability of affordable alternative energy sources. So essentially, we have substitutes available to our consumers. Due to the increase in the availability of alternative resources, the domestic producers do not need to produce as much of the original product since the demand is low. So the demand would essentially decrease for the original product, causing the demand to shift to the left. Your equilibrium price and your equilibrium quantity will decrease. And finally, we have our recommendation and our summary. We discussed the supply and demand of economic conditions scenario number 1 based on the regulations being passed restricting drilling, and that would decrease our supply, switching our curve to the left, increasing our price and decreasing our quantity. In scenario number 2, we discussed the U.S. having a large increase in population, which would increase our demand, making our curve move to the right. Price would go up, quantity would go down. In scenario number 3, we discussed a recession, Our demand would decrease, our curve would move to the left, and price and quantity would both decrease. And in scenario number 4, there's an increase in the availability of affordable alternative resources. So our demand would decrease, making the curve move to the left, and again, our price and quantity would decrease. So after looking through the different phases of the business cycle and the issues restricting production, the economic conditions do not support the pipeline construction at this time. Therefore, our recommendation would be to not proceed with the construction of the pipeline. Thank you.